Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Following breaking news that we just got from President Trump, courtesy of his True Social feed, where he informed us he just spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin by phone for over an hour. A conversation that the president described as a good one, but not a conversation, he said, that will lead to immediate peace, noting that Putin said very strongly he will have to respond to the recent attack on the airfields, referring, Joe, of course, to the drone strikes we saw across deep into Russian territory last weekend.
This could mean some very difficult days ahead for the Ukrainian people, knowing that Russia has a preference of attacking civilian targets, unlike what we saw from Ukraine. Over the course of the next half hour, we're going to bring you two very important voices in the midst of breaking news today in Washington with all the stories we're talking about. Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee will join, along with Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, all in the next 20 minutes here on the fastest show in politics. We do want to start on Capitol Hill, though, Kailey, with all of the breaking news today, and Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. First, Tyler, welcome back. On this phone call, lasted over an hour, Trump and Putin. What else do we know?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Well, Kailey read one of the key lines from President Trump's Truth Social post, which was that he said it was a good conversation, but not one that's going to ultimately lead to immediate peace. Now, of course, this was it was not known that they were going to have this call, but does come after the two leaders did speak by phone last month, and it contributed to what was really mounting frustration from this White House when it comes to really stalled progress towards reaching a ceasefire. Here, we're going to be watching how this really escalates as President Trump does confirm that Vladimir Putin has those plans to retaliate after we really saw that surprise drone attack by Ukraine that went so deep into Russian territory. It hit areas as far as Siberia. Now, we should say that earlier today, Vladimir Putin did come out and he dismissed the idea of meeting face-to-face with his Ukrainian counterpart, something that Ukraine says ultimately needs to happen if there is going to be progress when it comes to these talks. It also comes against a broader backdrop of a Bloomberg news scoop earlier this morning that the U.S. does not have plans to provide air defenses to back a reassurance force that would comprise of the United Kingdom and France that has been trying to convince the United States to give some firmer security guarantees moving forward here that would back any potential deal. So we're going to be watching closely how this ultimately ends up developing, because as you well know, the U.S. has gone to Russia before with a potential plan that could even see freezing the battle lines, the battlefield lines where they were, but that hasn't been enough to move the needle in really a significant way as of yet.
Well, and Tyler, as we consider the implications for what this means in terms of Russia's behavior in negotiations over the war in Ukraine, it seems President Trump is also suggesting that Russia will have a role to play in separate negotiations with Iran.
Right, exactly. And that's going to be a really interesting one to follow here, too. As we know, this really is a priority for this White House to ultimately try to make some kind of progress here. I believe that the fifth round of talks just concluded, and we're seeing Oman really be a mediator in these talks. But details haven't really emerged, including how a potential deal would differ from the JCPOA, which the U.S. pulled out of under the first Trump administration.
Tyler, we thought we'd be talking first with you about reconciliation. This is an important day on the track to make the Trump tax cuts either permanent or extended. You've got Republican members of the Senate Finance Committee headed to the White House to meet with President Trump. Among them, Senator Ron Johnson, who says he's a flat no unless these deficit numbers change. This, of course, follows the missive, several of them overnight again from Elon Musk, and now news from the CBO. How important is this meeting today, Tyler?
Yeah, the stakes are incredibly high, Joe, as the White House really does try to ramp up the pressure on these Republicans, with President Trump picking up the phone and calling them directly. Now, you alluded to this before. Perhaps the most vocal group that's emerging is this group that are pitching themselves as fiscal hawks, and that includes Ron Johnson. And I actually had the chance to catch up with the senator from Wisconsin earlier today. He's pushing for those deeper spending cuts. He says he's in close touch with the White House, and he realizes that it might take some time to get the sort of spending cuts that he's really looking for.
If I'm wrong, challenge me. I want to get in that dialogue. And quite honestly, that is really my discussion with President Trump. And so he had Kevin Hassett call me up right away. I'll be meeting with the Secretary. So he wants to engage. Again, he wants to reduce spending. It's just hard to do. I'm not denying that fact. It's a slender majority in the House, and Democrats having no interest whatsoever at reducing spending. That's our problem.
Now, of course, the other side of this, Joe and Kailey, is that the White House is dealing with conflicting demands. So you have some senators here that are calling for deeper spending cuts, raising some concerns about how some of the tax sweeteners, whether or not they would really contribute or incentivize growth over the long term. But then you have a group of Republicans that are concerned about what spending cuts ultimately will mean for Medicaid. Now, we should say that there's pretty broad agreement about those core pillars of this plan, including extending the 2017 tax cuts. But at the end of the day, there are really slim margins here in the Senate. They can only afford to lose 3 votes.
Indeed. All right. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you so much. And it's on Capitol Hill that we stay here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio as we turn to Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, who is back with us on the program. Senator, we appreciate your time. As we just heard our colleague Tyler there outlining that various portions of your body have demands as to what it will take to get them to a yes vote on this legislation. What's yours? What change do you need to see for you to vote for this package?
I think the most critical thing to keep in mind, Kailey, is the fact that if we don't get this done, Americans are looking at a north of $4 trillion tax increase. I was talking with Kevin Hassett at the White House yesterday. His projections are that that would yield a 6% decrease in our nation's GDP. That would be terrible for America, frankly, be terrible for the world economy. We can't let that happen. The main interest I have is making certain that we stimulate more capital investment in America, because more capital investment will beget more jobs, more economic activity. This will have a very positive impact on the economy, and frankly, it's something that the Congressional Budget Office completely misses in their analysis. They missed it at an incredible level back after the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act were passed. In fact, they missed it by north of $1 trillion worth of revenues. So I think that my colleagues need to certainly take into account the fact that this is a pro-growth bill. This tax package is going to stimulate more economic activity here in America. We will see growth that's not captured in these CBO estimates, but will have a material impact on our economy, on our well-being, and frankly, in terms of going the right direction to reducing the deficit.
Well, Senator, we've got a lot of questions about what's inside, and it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. You mentioned the CBO, so I do have to ask you about that. 2 big headlines today coming out of the Congressional Budget Office. First, the Republican tax bill that cleared the House, they say, would add $2.4 trillion to U.S. deficits. But that same Congressional Budget Office, which I know Republicans criticize a lot, is now projecting the Trump tariffs will cut the budget gap by $2.8 trillion. Do you buy that number? And if so, is this bill paid for?
Well, in the first case, what they do is static analysis. They don't take into account the dynamic of investment in the economy that will yield growth. So I think that's patently wrong. And the second, with regard to tariff revenue, it's possible, but we're not nearly to the end of our trade negotiations. Jamison Greer, our trade rep, working his heart out to try to bring together a significant sea change in the way America is treated on the global stage. I think we're going to make great progress, but it's very hard for me to say right now, and I don't know how the CBO is able to say this, where we're going to land on tariff revenues as well.
Well, yeah, it is worth pointing out the CBO was only scoring tariff revenues through where tariffs stood as of May 13th, and we already know changes have been made since then. There's still some legal questions around whether or not IEPA is going to stand, Senator, so we have to bear that in mind. We've heard from the Senate Majority Leader John Thune that there's going to have to be some adjustments made to the SALT cap, something that House Republicans from those SALT districts say would essentially mean that the deal dies when it returns back to the House. Knowing that the debt ceiling lift is also attached to this legislation, do you see risk around making changes like that? Could that bring the U.S. closer to the brink of default?
Well, I think there's always risk in any situation like this where you have a complex bill, Kailey. We're going to have a conference meeting right after I'm on with you now to begin the process of talking through where the Senate is going to land here. And I do expect that there will be improvements. It will be different. There will be deeper cuts. And we'll start to see text coming out on Friday. What I don't want to do is try to get ahead of those who are negotiating. As you know, the Finance Committee is going to the White House right now to meet with President Trump. This is a process that's underway, but I can say this at a very high level. My colleagues in the Senate want to see more cuts, more deficit reduction, but at the same time, I've been encouraging everyone to move expeditiously, to make certain that this happens extremely quickly, because the United States economy needs certainty. And with that certainty, we're going to see more capital investment. The longer this takes, again, the less certainty we've got, and that's going to have a negative impact on capital investment here in America.
With that in mind, Senator, I'd love to explore the idea of permanence with you, because we're hearing about this a lot more now. The likes of Steve Daines and others who say, no, we need to make permanent certain business tax breaks, specifically the full research and development deduction, bonus depreciation, and interest expensing. Are you on board with making them permanent?
Certainly I am. I agree with the premise completely. And, Steve Daines is a business person just like me. We understand the importance of being able to make long-term plans with respect to capital investments. That's what's driving Steve's position. I think he's exactly right. And we need to extend these as far as we possibly can. Permanent is the best possible answer we could achieve.
Senator, of course, while you and your colleagues are working on reconciliation, there is also actively underway an effort to advance the stablecoin legislation, the Genius Act. Last time you were on with us, we talked about some of the various amendments that were being put forward, which you said are being worked through. Have you had direct conversations more recently with either the majority leader or Senator Roger Marshall about whether or not the Credit Card Competition Act is going to become a real factor here?
Yes, those conversations are underway. I certainly respect the process that we're addressing. But right now, this really isn't about policy, nor is it process. We're just trying to get floor time right now to get this processed. We have broad agreement, Kailey, with respect to the content of this stablecoin legislation, My Genius Act. And this is going to, I think, take us into the 21st century in terms of upgrading our payment systems. It's going to have very desirable effects, taking the U.S. economy into the digital assets arena, keeping innovation here, lowering risk here in America, and putting in place guardrails that will protect consumers, because every one of these stablecoins will be backed up dollar for dollar with U.S. Treasuries. Very positive outcome here. We've got very strong support.
So, okay, what's the timeline, Senator, and what does it mean for the Clarity Act coming out of the House?
Joe, the timeline is the key issue right now. The window is closing on us to get this done because we've got to turn our attention to reconciliation. As I mentioned, we're going to a conference meeting, our first broad conference meeting, to talk about the reconciliation bill. We need to get the Genius Act passed. We need to get it on the floor, and that's where my discussions have been with the leader and with my colleagues, is getting that time on the floor as soon as possible. I'd like to start it today, tomorrow, but I'd like to get that time on the floor as soon as possible, so then we can turn our attention to dealing with the Reconciliation Act and getting more confirmations across the floor.
And when will your attention, Senator, turn to market structure? And when the time comes to actually look at a market structure bill, how akin do you expect it will be to the Clarity Act that was just introduced in the House last week?
Well, there's been a great deal of good work that's been done in the House. A lot of questions have come up in the process of building the stablecoin legislation that have been more appropriate to market structure. We're focused on it. We've already begun the process of building it here in the Senate. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of it's a natural outgrowth of the stablecoin legislation that we've been pushing forward. So we're going to turn our attention immediately to that, but I think the most immediate thing that will happen is the reconciliation bill coming to the floor of the Senate. In the meantime, I pledged to President Trump I would get this done in the first 100 days if I possibly could. We've exceeded that by a bit, but President Trump wants to see this legislation on his desk. J.D. Vance was at the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas just last week saying he wants to see a clean bill in front of him on stablecoin legislation in front of President Trump, and I think we can get there.
Interesting as you bear down on reconciliation, tax and spend legislation here, Senator. I know it's going to be an important day, and you're walking into this meeting after we're done with our conversation to begin hearing from Republican members of the House who apparently didn't have enough time to read the whole bill. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene says she's a no, having not read a section banning states from passing their own AI regulations. Mike Flood, Republican from Nebraska, doesn't like this idea of making it harder for judges to hold officials in contempt of court. They both didn't see it in the first pass. Have you had a chance to read that bill?
I haven't gone through the entirety of the bill. We're in the process of reviewing all the text that just came over in the past couple of days. But again, we're moving on it. The Finance Committee is at the White House negotiating it right now. The text is in process, and it's an item that's in motion. I understand that there may be items here that not everyone is happy with, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to compromise and get it done. I'll come back to the original point. The American economy needs this certainty, and I'm going to be working my heart out to make certain that we deliver the best possible product we can here. But I'll remind you as well, this isn't the last bite at the apple. We'll have the opportunity to have another reconciliation process coming up fairly soon. So we're going to find a number of other opportunities to improve the situation here in the American economy, achieve some of the other objectives of our legislators, and we can, if we don't solve it all here, we'll have another opportunity to do that.
Well, Senator, you will have an opportunity as soon as tonight to vote for the confirmation of Mickey Bowman to be the Fed's new vice chair of supervision after the cloture vote passed earlier today. This comes just a day after the Fed officially lifted the asset cap on Wells Fargo. Starting today, is this a new era of banking regulation in the United States?
I certainly think so. Michael Barr took us in exactly the wrong direction. And I'm very glad to see someone with the sensibilities of Mickey coming into this position. She's going to do a great job. What we need to do is return to the overarching mission of making certain that our capital markets are as competitive and safe as they possibly can be. Get out of the business of these extraneous, policy issues, whether it regards climate or other sorts of issues that essentially make the U.S. economy less competitive. And the gold plating that Michael Barr attempted to do, making us subject to even more regulations than the Europeans, only hampers American capital formation. Mickey has a very different point of view, and I'm very excited to see her come into this role.
Well, it is interesting seeing this asset cap lifted on Wells Fargo today, Senator. Your colleague, Elizabeth Warren, who's going to be with us a bit later this hour, is asking for 5 years of exam reports from the bank as a member of the banking committee, having suggested that they have not gone a year without breaking the law. Her statement says it's stunning. The Fed could not wait till the company went a full year without breaking the law before wiping its slate clean. Should she get those documents? Should the committee see them?
I'm all for transparency, Joe, and I'm all for having committee members have access to the information that they need, but I'm not about to respond to something that Elizabeth Warren has said just based on what she probably doesn't have. She doesn't have access to the documents at this point, so I don't understand her leveling these accusations, but she's want to do that.
Well, I wonder, Senator, if you'd like to respond to something President Trump has just said, as he shared with us on Truth Social, that he spent an hour and 15 minutes on the phone today with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He suggested that phone call will not lead to an immediate peace with Ukraine, but went on to say that Putin believes or suggested he could participate in discussions with Iran. And of course, the U.S. Approach to Iran is something I know you feel quite passionately about. Is it appropriate for Russia to be stepping in here?
Well, I think you understand well the fact that the previous administration removed all of the maximum pressure campaign that we had imposed on Iran. We had Iran to a point where they were ready to deal. Their reserves were below $10 billion. As soon as the Biden administration came in, they stopped enforcing the sanctions. They put Iran in a position to fund terror. We saw what happened with Hamas. We saw what happened with Hezbollah. We saw what happened with the Houthis. We're bringing that situation back under control. We're putting back in place maximum sanctions, and we also have the opportunity to get the world behind us, and I think the world should be behind us to ensure that Iran does not have the capability to threaten the rest of the world as they seem to want to do. President Trump has every right to seek out other world leaders, to find allies wherever he may. But at the end of the day, it's going to be up to us to take the leadership position to deal with Iran and to make certain that they don't have the capability nor the capacity to threaten the rest of the world as they have in the past. And understand this, they're behind all of the terror and all the disruption in the Middle East. It's got to come to an end.
A deep dive with Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee. Senator, it's good to see you, and we appreciate all of your time today on Bloomberg TV and radio. We're going to continue our conversation as we cross the aisle coming up to speak with Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts about these very same issues.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Noting the move we're seeing in Wells Fargo shares today, up just about 0.75% on the day after the Fed lifted the asset cap that has hampered the bank's growth for years now. But I would note, Joe, that Wells Fargo shares are also up about 20% since Election Day. So there was a lot of anticipation that this asset cap would indeed get lifted under this Trump administration.
They're definitely popping corks at Wells Fargo. Elizabeth Warren, on the other hand, is not, as we told you, will be joined here by the Democratic senator from Massachusetts, having issued a blistering statement following this Fed decision, Kailey, saying the entire Federal Reserve Board, including appointees of both parties, should be embarrassed. She's with us now, the Democrat from Massachusetts, live from Capitol Hill. Senator, it's great to see you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. You are demanding 5 years of exam reports from Wells Fargo. And I wonder what leverage you have here, how far you would go to get them. Would you threaten to hold up the nomination, for instance, of Michelle Bowman as the Fed's vice chair of supervision to get them?
Look, I'm already opposed to having Michelle Bowman as the vice chair for supervision. This is someone who has never seen a regulation for a giant bank that she wasn't willing to cut or undermine. But understand this about Wells Fargo. I think before you decide to lift this big penalty that's been in place for Wells Fargo for 7 years now, you should ask for like maybe 1 year in which they aren't caught breaking the law. Remember that in January of this year, the SEC tagged Wells Fargo for cheating investors. In December, the CFPB tagged Wells Fargo for cheating American consumers, by the way, to the tune of over $800 million. And in September, the OCC tagged Wells Fargo for money laundering. So we have the three big banking regulators all saying Wells Fargo's out there still breaking the law. And then a report just a few weeks ago by former and current Wells Fargo employees saying that the very activities that Wells Fargo engaged in 7 years ago, where they created fake accounts for people and so on because they were pressing their employees to get those numbers in, to get more people signed up for more accounts, that same activity is occurring today. And those are the circumstances under which the Fed unanimously says, hey, Wells Fargo, get on out of here. You don't need any extra regulation. No, that just doesn't wash.
Do you see any potential benefit here, Senator, though, of Wells Fargo being able to better compete with other big banks for the competitive landscape to change in that way?
Look, I'm all for competition, but I don't think that cheaters ought to have a leg up in competing. And that's really the part to remember here about Wells Fargo. The reason we want to have good enforcement of all of the banking laws is that the banks that actually follow the law, the banks that aren't engaged in money laundering or the banks that are not cheating their investors, that those banks ought to be able to play on a level playing field. And Wells Fargo, we know starting 7 years ago, that Wells Fargo was so boosting its profits and, by the way, its CEO compensation based on cheating American customers. And in fact, it was so awful what they did that it wasn't just civil penalties, they were in violation of criminal laws. So the idea that, boy, we want to get them right back out there competing with the other banks at a time when their own employees are saying, hey, they're back to doing the stuff they were doing before. That's not the direction we want to go.
Senator Elizabeth Warren live with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm going to ask you to walk with me here for a second, Senator, because I don't know if Donald Trump is watching us right now, but the president is posting about you right now, just on Truth Social. Donald Trump writes, quote, I am very pleased to announce that after all these years, I agree with Senator Elizabeth Warren on something. The debt limit should be entirely scrapped to prevent an economic catastrophe. He's reposting you here where you suggest as much. This is less than 24 hours after Elon Musk said shame on Republicans who passed the reconciliation bill in the House. You're finding yourself within a 24-hour period agreeing with Donald Trump and Elon Musk. What's going on around here?
Well, look, I think on the debt ceiling, I've been on this for many, many years. The debt ceiling is just something that's been used as leverage in negotiations. The United States should never, never threaten to default on its debt. We should get rid of this debt ceiling altogether. When we pass a bill saying that we're going to do a certain thing, that is our saying, and we're going to pay for it. That's what the United States government does. So I think that Donald Trump and I, hey, listen, I'm ready to join up with him and make that happen. We need to get rid of the debt ceiling altogether, not extend it, not say, ooh, while this is going on, this budget negotiation, let's just roll out a few $1 trillion more in the debt ceiling. Nope, that has gotten us into trouble before. It continues to get us into trouble. Donald Trump is right. Let's get rid of it altogether.
Well, so Senator, if we are to see if the Senate and House cannot get this reconciliation bill through in time for the mid-July request the Treasury Secretary has made to avoid bumping up against the X date, would you support an initiative like that separately, a legislative effort to eliminate the debt ceiling before that X date comes?
Yeah, look, we should do it now. There's no reason to delay. Donald Trump is exactly right on this. It's what I've been arguing for literally for years, and that is get rid of the debt ceiling. It's serving no function except for holdout parties to try to use in negotiations. And that makes no sense. That doesn't serve our nation. But we should do that now. It doesn't need to be tied to anything. It doesn't need any special date on it. Ask the Republicans. They're the ones in control of the floor. Let's bring that to the floor right now. It's a simple piece of legislation. I'm ready to go on it. I think it's the right thing for us to do.
Senator, I want to ask you from your perch on the Armed Services Committee about what else we heard from Donald Trump today. He had an hour and 15-minute long call with Vladimir Putin. At the end of the call, he wrote about it and said that peace is not imminent in Ukraine. He did say, however, that Putin will have to respond to the recent attack on the airfields that Ukraine conducted over the weekend using this wild scheme with drones that had been smuggled into the country. What do you make of this assessment, and what is Ukraine in for in the days ahead?
Right. Look, Vladimir Putin has been playing Donald Trump, and pretty much everybody in the world can see that. That's not just me seeing it, not just people in the United States see it. Leaders around the world see it. And it looks like Donald Trump is beginning to figure that out and starting to push back against Putin. We owe it to Ukraine to do everything we can to support them in their fight. They are on the front lines fighting for democracy, and they are on the front lines against an expansionist Russia. Understand this, if Ukraine falls and Vladimir Putin gets either a big chunk of it or all of it, he's not stopping there. He's coming for more and more and more because that's who Vladimir Putin is. It is important right now to help Ukraine push back. They are on the front lines fighting the war for democracy on behalf of all of Europe, on behalf of the United States, on behalf of freedom-loving countries everywhere in the world. And we should give them all the support we can.
All right, Senator, we appreciate you joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. The Democratic senator from Massachusetts, also ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, Elizabeth Warren.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We turn to our political panel today. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency in Congress, and Democratic analyst, alongside Republican strategist Chapin Fay, founder of Lighthouse Public Affairs. Chapin, as we hear Senator Warren say, I agree with Trump, let's do this, get rid of the debt ceiling right now. Is this the potential off-ramp for if the Republicans cannot get through this partisan reconciliation bill with a debt ceiling hike attached in time?
Well, what wild times we're living in, right? Cats and dogs are living together. Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump are almost praising each other publicly in agreement. But yes, to answer your question, I do think this is a way maybe to grease the skids there, grease the wheels, so to speak, and get a deal done. By the way, this is how throughout history, American history, this is how big deals get done and how major programs, like some of the programs the Big Beautiful Bill are arguing over right now, get done, right? Compromise and agreement among people on the left and the right. So I think this is good news. I mean, I have always seen, I think MAGA sees Donald Trump as a deal maker on behalf of the American people, and they have faith in him to do that. It will be wild to see them support Elizabeth Warren in the same endeavor, but we'll see.
That was a wild moment. We have to stop down and acknowledge what just happened here. The president's posting about Elizabeth Warren while she's live on the air with us. Jeannie, is that how this ends? With the debt limit?
He's your biggest fan, Joe and Kailey, so I love it.
You can't help but to watch.
Who can help but watch you guys? The reality is that I love his post too, which is strange because it seems to me he's calling for some bipartisan movement forward. He ends the post by saying, let's get together, Republicans and Democrats, and do this. I'm not sure if that is just limited to the debt ceiling, which absolutely needs to be scrapped, but it should also pertain to this issue of the reconciliation bill overall. So I don't know if it's a bad sign for the president that the Republicans aren't moving on the bill, so he's reaching across the aisle, or a good sign that he's just found religion that he needs to work across the aisle. But I'm in favor of you two bringing the parties together like this. I love this.
Getting a lot done here.
Balance of power. That's what we aim to do here. Cheap. And finally, we just have a minute left, but President Trump and Republicans overall have had a lot of words about the CBO in recent days that they've shared, specifically poo-pooing essentially their estimates on the tax bill. But now the CBO says tariffs could reduce the deficit by $2.8 trillion over the next 10 years. Is that argument now nullified?
I don't think so. I mean, this is sort of some of the sausage being made that always spills out into the public. And if the CBO says something you like, you support it and you use it as a proof point. And when the CBO, goes the other way, you can do what the Republicans are doing recently. But it is helpful to have the CBO give some numbers that can help an argument and push things forward for sure.
Jeannie, what's your thought on this when it comes to the CBO? I think I know your answer, but I think Republicans are suggesting that the broken clock is right once a day when it comes to CBO's take on tariffs, but CBO is broken when it comes to scoring the tax cut bill because it doesn't use dynamic scoring. Am I warm on this?
You are hot, Joe. Let's say you're hot. The reality is that the CBO, I think, is a good day for the CBO because they giveth and they taketh away. You know, as you guys have been talking about on the tariffs, they are, supporting what the president is doing. I mean, not partisan wise, but in terms of the impact on the deficit. And yet, when it comes to the issue of the reconciliation bill, they are underscoring the fact that this is going to increase the deficit an awful lot. So I think it's a good day for the CBO because it shows that they are indeed bipartisan, or nonpartisan is probably a better term. But the reality is that the president and the Republicans are going to have to really get their head around what Elon Musk, what so many people have been talking about. You simply have a math issue when it comes to the reconciliation bill. You cannot add 2.5 trillion plus to the deficit and call yourself economically or fiscally responsible. I know Russ Vought and others are out there saying about this static scoring and all of this. The reality is the CBO is running the numbers right. Elon Musk and others know how to run the numbers. This doesn't add up. So you either have to cut spending or you have to increase taxes. It's pretty basic.
We just heard that from Bill Hagerty. Broken clock is right.
Yeah.
Twice a day, by the way.
I do want to follow up on your point on Elon Musk, though, Jeannie. To what extent is he actually credible in his contentions that the budget deficit is a problem and Congress is making the wrong choices here, knowing that A, his companies benefit from massive government contracts, and B, as the Speaker of the House was quick to point out, he also wanted those EV credits that this bill rolls back to stick around. So maybe there's a bit of a personal issue here.
Yeah, I mean, certainly as it pertains to the NASA administrator, as you mentioned, to the EV mandate, to Starlink, he apparently wanted to maintain his special status as a special government employee. All of that is true. But the reality is Elon Musk knows how to do this math. And anybody who looks at this objectively, there is no way that you can make the claim that it doesn't add an enormous amount to the deficit. And we will be strapping our children and grandchildren with a government and really a country that is economically and fiscally in a horrible position, not just as a result of the Republicans, Democrats as well. We all own this and we have to get out of it. So he's right on the math here, regardless of his reasons for being frustrated.
How are you looking at this Elon Musk thing, Chapin? Obviously a MAGA darling until, I don't know, a few hours ago when this post hit. He hasn't always seen eye to eye with the president, but are you looking at this as a disgruntled government contractor or a guy who saw too much when he was in Washington?
No, I think Elon Musk is an honest broker here, and he's giving his input, right? And it's important input. While I don't know the level of influence he'll retain after leaving, the president's side, after seeing him at the president's side almost on a daily basis. But there's no question that he has input, and like Jeannie and you all said, he knows the math, he knows the numbers, and he's He's trying to shape the legislation just like the president and every other special interest. I mean, I wouldn't call them special interests in the negative way, but that's what happens right now when you're in this precarious situation while they're reconciling the two bills and trying to get this passed without destroying the economy and the budget. And Elon Musk has always been an honest broker in my mind on the numbers, on the math. So that's what he's doing. I don't see him as a disgruntled employee. I think he's doing his part to continue doing his part.
Chapin, you and frankly, Jeannie are both joining us from New York. So I want to ask you about the contention the majority leader has made that there's going to have to be adjustments made to the SALT cap deal that was struck in the House, lifting it from $10,000 to $40,000. Chapin, if that adjustment is material, do you see any way in which those SALT caucus Republicans are going to be able to vote for this package when it returns to the other chamber?
It's going to be interesting to see. They have sort of boxed themselves into a corner, fighting for this, some of them, and some of them sort of are going to go along. So it'll be interesting to see what the final outcome is. But this is a huge deal in New York and in their districts, and in some of these Republican members' districts in particular, in the suburbs, like Congressman Lawler, right? Sort of the northern suburbs of New York City. And this is a critical issue to them and their reelection in some cases. So I think you're going to see some of them fighting for it really hard, and I think some of them are going to go along quietly and hope for the best.
Great conversation with our panel. That's Chapin Fay, Republican strategist, Lighthouse Public Affairs, and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributor. Great to see both of you. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.